What happens when a single father's simple act of kindness collides with a billionaire's desperate search for authenticity? Tonight, we're diving into a story that will challenge everything you think you know about love deception and second chances. A tale where a worn wooden pencil becomes the key to unlocking hearts, and where the line between salvation and betrayal blurs beyond recognition. Stay with me until the very end. This journey will take us through the darkest valleys and highest peaks of human emotion. And don't forget to comment which city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The Pennsylvania fog rolled in like a living thing that October evening, thick and suffocating, swallowing the winding mountain road in its gray embrace. Daniel Hayes squinted through the windshield of his battered pickup truck, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel as he navigated the treacherous curves. In the passenger seat, 8-year-old Ethan dozed fitfully, his small frame curled against the worn fabric, a sketchbook clutched to his chest even in sleep. "Almost home, buddy," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible over the truck's laboring engine. The day had been long. Another 12 hours at Morrison's auto repair. Another 12 hours of keeping his head down and his hands busy. Another 12 hours of pretending that the ache in his chest from Sarah's absence wasn't slowly eating him alive. 2 years. 2 years since cancer had stolen his wife, his anchor, his everything. 2 years of learning to braid Ethan's hair for school pictures, of burning dinner more nights than he cared to admit, of lying awake listening to his son cry for his mother in the next room. 2 years of being both father and mother, provider and comforter, strong enough for two but feeling like half a man. The fog seemed to thicken with each mile until Daniel could barely see 10 feet ahead. He eased off the gas, his mechanic's instincts telling him that something felt wrong about this night. The air was too still, too heavy, charged with the kind of electric tension that comes before a storm. That's when he saw the red glow. At first, it was just a smudge of color bleeding through the fog like watercolor on wet paper. But as Daniel rounded the next curve, the scene materialized with horrifying clarity. A luxury sedan, sleek and black, as midnight had careened off the road and slammed into the massive oak tree that had stood sentinel at this bend for over a century. Steam rose from the crumpled hood, and one headlight flickered like a dying firefly. "Jesus," Daniel breathed, pulling over immediately. The truck's brakes squealed in protest as he brought it to a stop on the narrow shoulder. His heart hammered against his ribs as he turned to check on Ethan, who miraculously remained asleep despite the sudden stop. Training kicked in. Daniel had been a volunteer firefighter before Sarah got sick, before medical bills and single parenthood forced him to give up everything except the bare necessity of survival. He grabbed the emergency kit from behind his seat and sprinted toward the wreckage, his work boots slipping on the wet asphalt. The driver's side door was crushed beyond hope, but the passenger side had taken less damage. Daniel cupped his hands against the window and peered inside, his breath fogging the glass. Through the spider web of cracks, he could make out a figure slumped over the steering wheel. A woman unconscious, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. Ma'am, can you hear me?" Daniel tried the door handle. Locked. He looked around frantically, knowing that in this fog, on this isolated stretch of road, it could be hours before anyone else came along. Hours this woman might not have. Without hesitation, Daniel grabbed a tire iron from his kit and smashed the passenger side window. Glass scattered like diamonds in the headlight's glow as he reached inside to unlock the door. The woman didn't stir as he carefully pulled the door open, the metal groaning in protest. She was beautiful, even unconscious and injured. Dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders and her clothes, a designer dress that probably cost more than Daniel made in a month, spoke of wealth and privilege. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the weak pulse he found at her wrist, the shallow rise and fall of her chest. "Hey, stay with me," Daniel murmured, though she couldn't hear him. He had basic first aid training enough to know not to move her too much in case of spinal injury. But he could see she was breathing, could feel her pulse growing stronger. The cut on her forehead looked worse than it was. Head wounds always bled like hell. As he worked, Daniel became aware of another presence. Ethan had woken up and wandered over, his small face pale in the strange light. "Dad, is she hurt bad?" "She's going to be okay, son. But I need you to go back to the truck and get me the blanket from behind the seat, all right? And be careful on this wet road." Ethan nodded solemnly and scampered back to the truck. The boy had grown up too fast these past 2 years, had learned to be Daniel's little helper in ways that broke his father's heart. No 8-year-old should have to be that responsible, that aware of how fragile life could be. When Ethan returned with the blanket, Daniel tucked it carefully around the unconscious woman. Her breathing was steadier now, and some color had returned to her cheeks. She would need a hospital, but she was stable. "Should we call 911? Ethan asked, his voice small and worried. Daniel reached for his phone, then swore softly when he saw the screen. No signal. Not unusual out here in the mountains, especially with the fog playing havoc with the cell towers. The nearest hospital was 20 miles away, the nearest house at least 5. "We need to get her to a hospital ourselves," Daniel decided. "Help me figure out how to move her safely." It took nearly 30 minutes of careful maneuvering, but they managed to get the woman into the back seat of Daniel's truck, where she could lie flat with the blanket tucked around her. Ethan sat in the front, his sketchbook forgotten, as he kept turning around to check on their unexpected passenger. "What's her name?" Det said. "I don't know, buddy. I couldn't find her purse or any ID." The drive to Mercy General Hospital was a nightmare of fog and worry. Daniel drove as fast as he dared, one eye on the road and one on the rearview mirror, watching for any sign that the woman's condition was worsening. She remained unconscious but stable, her breathing regular and strong. Halfway to the hospital, she began to stir. "Where?" Her voice was soft, confused, with an accent Daniel couldn't quite place. Not local, that was for sure. "Hey, take it easy," Daniel said, catching her eyes in the mirror. They were green. He noticed the color of deep forest shadows. "You were in an accident. We're taking you to the hospital." "An accident?" She tried to sit up, then winced and lay back down. I can't remember." "Head injuries can do that," Daniel said gently. "Don't worry about it right now. Just rest." "But who are you? Why did you?" She was struggling to focus, to make sense of what was happening. "My name's Daniel. This is my son, Ethan. We found you crashed into a tree about 20 minutes ago." In the mirror, Daniel saw tears begin to slide down her cheeks. "You stopped. You actually stopped." There was something in her voice, surprise, as if kindness was the last thing she'd expected from the world. It made Daniel's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. "Of course we stopped," Ethan piped up, turning around in his seat. "Dad says you always help people who need help. That's what good people do." The woman's eyes found Ethan's, and for a moment something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, of shared loneliness. "You're very wise for someone so young." "Mom used to say I was an old soul," Ethan replied matter-of-factly. "She's in heaven now, but Dad says she still watches over us." Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Ethan rarely mentioned Sarah so casually anymore, and hearing it always felt like a knife to the chest, sharp and sudden and breathtaking in its pain. The woman in the back seat seemed to sense the shift in mood. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry for your loss. Thank you, Daniel managed. She would have liked you stopping to help too. Sarah always said kindness was the only thing that really mattered in this world. They reached the hospital just as the fog began to lift, revealing the amber glow of the emergency room entrance. Daniel pulled up to the doors and honked his horn until a pair of orderlies emerged with a wheelchair. What happened? One of them asked as they carefully helped the woman from the truck. Single car accident about 40 minutes ago, Daniel explained. She was unconscious when we found her came to about halfway here. Possible head injury, but vitals seem stable. The orderlies were efficient and professional, transferring their patient to the wheelchair with practiced ease. As they prepared to wheel her inside, the woman reached out and caught Daniel's hand. Wait, she said, her green eyes searching his face with desperate intensity. What's your name again? Daniel Hayes. Daniel Hayes, she repeated, as if committing it to memory. How can I ever thank you? Daniel felt heat rise in his cheeks. This was always the awkward part. The gratitude, the offers of reward, the assumption that kindness came with a price tag. No need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same. No, she said firmly, surprising him with her certainty. No, they wouldn't have. Before Daniel could respond, the orderlies were wheeling her through the automatic doors. She craned her neck to look back at him, and Daniel found himself raising his hand in a small wave. Ethan did the same, his face solemn and thoughtful. Dad, Ethan said, as they watched the doors close behind her. Yeah, buddy. She seemed really sad. Not just hurt sad, but lonely sad. Like how you get sometimes when you think I'm asleep. Daniel's breath caught. Sometimes his son's perception was almost frightening in its accuracy. What makes you say that? Her eyes, Ethan said simply. They looked like yours did right after Mom died. Like she was lost and didn't know how to find her way home. They stood there for a moment, in the amber light of the hospital entrance, father and son bound together by shared loss and the strange intimacy of helping a stranger. Finally, Daniel put his hand on Ethan's shoulder. Come on, let's go home. It's way past your bedtime. As they walked back to the truck, Daniel didn't notice the small wooden pencil that had fallen from his shirt pocket during the rescue. It lay there on the wet asphalt, worn smooth from years of use, the kind of simple tool a working man might carry for jotting down estimates or sketching quick repairs. By morning, it would be gone, collected as evidence or swept away by hospital maintenance. But for now, it remained, a small, forgotten testament to an act of kindness that would ripple through two lives in ways Daniel Hayes could never imagine. The drive home was quiet, Ethan finally succumbing to exhaustion in the passenger seat. Daniel's mind wandered as he navigated the familiar roads, thinking about green eyes and designer dresses, and the way the woman had said his name as if it were something precious worth remembering. At home, Daniel carried his sleeping son inside their small house. A modest two-bedroom that had once felt cozy with 3 people, but now seemed to echo with emptiness. He tucked Ethan into bed, kissing his forehead, and whispering the same words Sarah used to say, "Sweet dreams, little man. Tomorrow's another adventure." In his own bedroom, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off his work boots, wincing as his back protested the long day. On the nightstand, Sarah's picture smiled at him from its silver frame. Taken on their wedding day, her face radiant with joy and hope for their future together. "Well, Sarah," he whispered to the photograph, "we helped someone tonight. I think you would have been proud." The house settled around him with its familiar creaks and sighs. Outside, the fog had finally lifted completely, revealing a canopy of stars that seemed impossibly bright after the gray blindness of the evening. Daniel lay back on the bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. He wondered about the woman. What her story was, how she'd ended up alone on that dangerous road, whether she had family worried about her somewhere. She'd seemed so surprised by their help, as if kindness was a foreign concept. That bothered him more than he cared to admit. In his experience, people were generally good. They helped their neighbors, looked out for each other's kids, brought casseroles when someone was sick or grieving. But maybe in her world, a world of designer dresses and luxury cars, things were different. Maybe kindness really was rare. Daniel finally drifted off to sleep, still thinking about green eyes and the weight of loneliness he'd recognized in them. He couldn't know that 30 miles away, in a private room at Mercy, General Isabella Drake was lying awake, thinking about the same thing. The doctors had confirmed what Daniel suspected: a mild concussion, some bruising, but nothing serious. She would be released in the morning, with instructions to take it easy for a few days. But physical healing was the least of her concerns. Isabella stared at the ceiling tiles and tried to piece together what had happened. She remembered driving back from another pointless board meeting, another day of playing the role everyone expected her to play. She remembered the fog rolling in the way it had seemed to swallow her car whole. She remembered the strange sense of peace that had come over her before the crash, as if the universe was offering her an escape from a life that felt more like an elaborate prison than a blessing. And then there had been the voice in the darkness, gentle, worried, real in a way that nothing in her life had been real for years. Daniel Hayes, the man who had stopped for a stranger, who had risked his own safety and that of his child to help someone he didn't even know. Isabella closed her eyes and tried to recall every detail of their brief interaction. The way his hands had been gentle but sure as he'd helped her into his truck. The pride in his voice when he'd talked about his son. The flash of pain that had crossed his features when the prompter mentioned his mother. A widower. Raising his child alone, working with his hands, living a life of quiet dignity that Isabella's billions couldn't buy. When was the last time someone had looked at her and seen just a person in need of help? When was the last time someone had expected nothing from her except the basic human decency of accepting assistance? She thought about the boy, too. Ethan, with his serious eyes and wise words. The way he'd turned around in the truck seat to watch over her as if she were something precious that needed protecting. When was the last time someone had cared about her well-being without calculating what they might gain from it? Isabella had built her life on the assumption that everyone wanted something from her. Money, connections, access to her world of privilege and power. She'd learned to read the angles, to spot the manipulations, to protect herself from those who would use her for their own ends. It was exhausting and isolating, but it was safe. But tonight, she'd encountered something she'd forgotten existed: genuine human kindness with no strings attached. And it had shaken her to her core. A nurse came in to check her vitals, a kind, middle-aged woman with tired eyes and gentle hands. "How are you feeling, honey?" "Better," Isabella replied automatically. Then, surprising herself, she added, "The man who brought me in, Daniel Hayes, is he still here?" The nurse checked her chart. "I don't think so, sweetie. He left after the doctors took you back. But he did ask us to let him know how you were doing. Seemed like a real nice man." "Yes," Isabella whispered. "He is." After the nurse left, Isabella lay in the darkness and made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find Daniel Hayes. Not to offer him money or try to buy his friendship, but to properly thank him for reminding her that good people still existed in the world. She had no idea that this simple desire for connection would lead her down a path of deception and heartbreak, of love found and lost and found again. She couldn't foresee the price that would be paid for her desperate hunger for authenticity, or the way her carefully constructed lies would eventually threaten to destroy the very thing she was seeking. All Isabella knew as she finally drifted off to sleep in that sterile hospital room was that for the first time in years, she felt something other than the crushing weight of loneliness. She felt hope. And 30 miles away, Daniel Hayes slept the deep, dreamless sleep of a man whose conscience was clear, never suspecting that his simple act of kindness had just set in motion a love story that would challenge everything he thought he knew about trust, forgiveness, and the courage to believe in second chances. The wooden pencil was gone by morning, swept away by the hospital's cleaning crew. But the connection it represented, fragile as a thread, strong as steel, had only just begun to weave its way through two hearts that had forgotten how to hope for anything beyond survival. In the days that followed, both Daniel and Isabella would find themselves thinking about that foggy night more often than they cared to admit. Neither could know that their paths would cross again, or that when they did, it would be under circumstances that would test every assumption they'd made about love, truth, and the courage required to build something real in a world that seemed determined to tear genuine connections apart. The rescue was over, but the real story, the story of two wounded souls finding their way back to life through each other, was just beginning. 2 years passed like pages turning in a book Daniel never wanted to read. The seasons cycled through their familiar dance, autumn's fire giving way to winter's bite, spring's tentative hope blooming into summer's confident warmth. But for Daniel Hayes, time felt suspended in amber, each day a careful repetition of the last. The memory of that foggy night had settled into the quiet corners of his mind, surfacing occasionally when he drove past the old oak tree, or when Ethan asked whatever happened to the sad lady. Daniel would shrug and say he hoped she was doing well, never mentioning that he'd called the hospital twice in the weeks following the accident, just to make sure she'd recovered fully. The nurses had been kind but professional. She'd been discharged, they said, and was doing fine. That had been enough. It had to be. Life had a way of demanding attention to the immediate, and Daniel's life was particularly demanding. Morrison's auto repair had become his second home, a place where he could lose himself in the honest work of fixing things that were broken. Cars didn't lie or pretend to be something they weren't. A busted transmission was a busted transmission. A worn brake pad was a worn brake pad. Fix the problem, send the customer on their way. Simple, clean, real. "Daniel, you've got another walk-in," called Jerry Morrison from the office, his gravelly voice carrying over the sound of pneumatic tools and classic rock radio. Jerry was pushing 70, but still worked like a man half his age, his weathered hands steady as surgeons when it came to engine work. He'd given Daniel a job when no one else would. But understanding without words that a grieving widower needed purpose more than pity. Daniel wiped his hands on his coveralls and emerged from under the hood of Mrs. Patterson's ancient Buick. The walk-in customer was a woman standing uncertainly in the doorway between the garage and the office. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, but something about her posture suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable in the grease-stained environment of a working garage. "Can I help you?" Daniel asked, approaching with the easy confidence of a man in his element. The woman turned, and for a moment, just a moment, something flickered in her green eyes. Recognition impossible. Daniel was sure he'd never seen her before, yet there was something familiar about the curve of her smile, the way she held herself. "I hope so," she said, and her voice was warm honey over steel. "My car's been making this terrible noise, and I'm afraid I don't know the first thing about engines." "What kind of noise?" Daniel found himself asking, though part of his mind was still trying to place where he might have seen those eyes before. "It's hard to describe." Sort of a grinding sound when I brake, especially going down hills. Daniel nodded. Sounds like you might need new brake pads. What kind of car? She gestured toward the parking area. The blue Honda Civic. It's not much, but it gets me where I need to go. Daniel followed her outside, noting the way she moved. Graceful, but guarded like someone accustomed to being watched. The Civic was indeed modest, a few years old, but well-maintained. He popped the hood and began his examination, aware that she was watching his every move with unusual intensity. "You're not from around here," he observed as he worked. It wasn't really a question. "No, I'm just passing through. My name's Anna, by the way. Anna Miller." Daniel Hayes. He glanced up from the engine compartment. "Where are you heading, if you don't mind me asking?" Anna was quiet for a moment, as if the question required careful consideration. "I'm not entirely sure yet. I'm taking some time to figure things out." There was a story there Daniel could tell. Pain carefully hidden behind practiced composure. He recognized the signs because he wore them himself. "Well, your brake pads are definitely shot," he said, straightening up. "I can have new ones on there by end of day tomorrow. Won't be cheap, but it's a safety issue." "Of course, whatever it costs." Something in her quick agreement struck Daniel as odd. Most people wanted to know the price up front, wanted to shop around, or at least negotiate. But Anna Miller seemed almost relieved to have someone else make the decision. "I'll write up an estimate," Daniel said. "Jerry can give you a ride back to town if you need one." "Actually," Anna said, and there was something almost shy in her voice, "would it be all right if I stayed? I know it sounds strange, but I find garages peaceful. All that purposeful work, fixing things that are broken." Daniel studied her face, seeing something there that resonated with his own need for the honest simplicity of mechanical work. "Sure, if you want. Fair warning, though. It gets pretty loud in there." Anna smiled, and for the first time since she'd walked in, it seemed genuine. "I don't mind noise. It's the silence I have trouble with." Over the next few hours, Anna proved to be an unexpectedly pleasant presence in the garage. She didn't get in the way or ask endless questions like some customers did. Instead, she found a spot on an old milk crate near Daniel's workstation and simply watched. There was something almost meditative about her attention, as if she were studying not just his work, but the rhythm of it, the way his hands moved with unconscious precision, born of years of practice. "You love what you do," she observed during a lull in the afternoon. Daniel looked up from the brake assembly he was rebuilding. "Most days, there's something satisfying about taking something broken and making it work again." "Is that what drew you to it? The fixing?" Daniel's hands stilled for a moment. "Actually, I kind of fell into it. After my wife died, I needed work that kept my hands busy and my mind focused. Jerry took a chance on me even though I didn't have much formal training." "I'm sorry," Anna said softly. "About your wife." "Thank you." Daniel resumed his work but continued talking. Something about Anna's presence seemed to invite confidence. "Sarah always said I was good at fixing things. Everything except your own broken heart. She used to tease me." Anna was quiet for a long moment. "What was she like?" The question caught Daniel off guard. Most people avoided asking about Sarah as if mentioning her might cause him to shatter. But Anna's voice held genuine curiosity, not the careful pity he was used to. "She was light," Daniel said finally. "You know how some people just seem to make everything brighter just by being there? That was Sarah. She could find something to laugh about in the worst situations. Used to drive me crazy when we were dating. I was this serious, brooding type, and she'd just refused to let me stay in my dark moods. She sounds wonderful. She was. Daniel's voice grew thick. Some days I can barely remember what her voice sounded like. Other days I swear I can hear her laughing in the next room. When he looked up, he was surprised to see tears in Anna's eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, quickly wiping them away. "I didn't mean to. It's just the way you talk about her. It's beautiful." "Most people think I should be moving on by now," Daniel said with a bitter laugh. 2 years is apparently the socially acceptable grieving period. "People say that because grief makes them uncomfortable," Anna replied with surprising firmness. "They want to put it in a neat little box with clear timelines and stages. But love doesn't work that way. Real love leaves marks that never fully fade." Daniel stared at her, struck by the depth of understanding in her voice. "You sound like you speak from experience." Anna's composure flickered for just a moment. "Different kind of loss, maybe, but loss all the same." Before Daniel could ask what she meant, the conversation was interrupted by the sound of the school bus rumbling past the garage. Daniel glanced at his watch and swore softly. "Ethan will be home soon. I need to wrap this up." "Ethan? My son. He's 10 now, though some days he acts like he's 40. Daniel's entire demeanor softened when he talked about his boy. "He usually comes by the garage after school, does his homework in Jerry's office. That must be hard raising him alone. Some days are better than others. He's a good kid, though. Too good sometimes. I worry he's growing up too fast, trying to take care of me instead of just being a kid." 20 minutes later, Ethan bounded through the garage door with the infectious energy of a child freed from the confines of elementary school. His backpack was slung carelessly over one shoulder, and his brown hair stuck up at odd angles from the day's adventures. "Dad, Mrs. Henderson says I can enter my drawing in the county art contest, and Tommy Martinez threw up in the cafeteria during lunch and—" Ethan stopped mid-sentence when he spotted Anna sitting quietly near Daniel's workstation. "Oh, hi." Anna smiled, and Daniel noticed how her entire face transformed with genuine warmth. "You must be Ethan. I'm Anna. Are you getting your car fixed?" "I am. Your dad's been taking very good care of it." Ethan studied Anna with the unself-conscious directness of childhood. "You have pretty eyes. They're green like the leaves on Dad's favorite tree in our backyard." Daniel felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Ethan," but Anna laughed to sound like silver bells. "Thank you, Ethan. That's very sweet." "Do you like to draw?" Ethan asked, already digging in his backpack. "I'm working on this picture for art class, but I can't get the shadows right." He pulled out a worn sketchbook and flipped to a page covered with pencil marks. It was a drawing of the garage, Daniel realized, amazingly detailed for a 10-year-old's work. He could recognize Jerry's cluttered office, the lifts, even the old Coca-Cola sign that hung crooked near the tool bench. Anna leaned forward to examine the drawing, and Daniel saw her breath catch slightly. "Ethan, this is extraordinary. You have real talent." "You think so? Dad says I'm good, but dads have to say that." "No," Anna said seriously. "This isn't parent bias. This is genuine artistic ability. Look at how you've captured the texture of the concrete floor, the way the light falls through those windows. You see things most people miss." Ethan beamed under her praise, and Daniel felt a strange tightness in his chest, watching the interaction. It had been so long since Ethan had received that kind of encouragement from anyone other than family. "The shadows are tricky," Anna continued, pointing to the drawing. "But you're on the right track. See how the light is coming from multiple sources. You've got the overhead fluorescence, but also the natural light from the bay doors. Each light source creates its own shadow pattern." She pulled a pencil from her purse, an expensive-looking thing that seemed out of place with her modest appearance, and made a few light marks on the paper. Under her guidance, the flat drawing suddenly came to life, gaining depth and dimension that transformed it from a child's sketch into something approaching real art. "How did you do that?" Ethan breathed, staring at his improved drawing in wonder. "Practice," Anna said simply, "and really looking at things. Most people see what they expect to see, but artists have to see what's actually there." "Are you an artist?" Anna hesitated, that careful pause Daniel was beginning to recognize. "I used to be. I studied art in school." "What kind of art did you make?" "Mostly paintings. Landscapes, some portraits." Her voice grew soft, almost wistful. "I painted because I wanted to capture moments of beauty, preserve them somehow." "Why did you stop?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Anna's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on the pencil, and Daniel saw her swallow hard before answering. "Life got complicated. Other responsibilities took over." Daniel recognized the weight of regret in her voice, the particular sadness of dreams deferred until they became dreams abandoned. "It's never too late to start again," he said quietly. Anna looked up at him, and for a moment the careful mask she wore slipped entirely. In her green eyes, Daniel saw longing so raw it made his chest ache. "Sometimes it feels like it is," she whispered. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Two people who had lost pieces of themselves, recognizing the grief in each other's eyes. Ethan, with the oblivious wisdom of childhood, broke the spell. "You should come have dinner with us. Dad makes really good spaghetti, and I can show you my other drawings." "Oh, I couldn't impose," Anna began. "It's not imposing," Daniel heard himself saying, surprising them both. "I mean, if you don't have other plans. It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome to join us." Anna looked between father and son, and Daniel could see the war playing out behind her eyes, want battling with something that looked like fear. "I'd like that," she said finally. "Very much." An hour later, they were seated around Daniel's small kitchen table, sharing a meal of spaghetti and garlic bread, while Ethan chattered about his day at school. The house felt different with Anna there. Warmer somehow, as if her presence had chased away some of the lingering shadows of grief. "This is delicious," Anna said, and Daniel was pleased to see her eating with genuine appetite rather than the polite picking he'd expected. "Dad's the best cook ever," Ethan declared through a mouthful of pasta. "Well, except Mom was better at pancakes. She could make them look like animals and stuff." Daniel tensed, waiting for the familiar knife twist of pain that came whenever Ethan mentioned Sarah so casually. But tonight, with Anna sitting across from them, the ache felt softer somehow, like a bruise instead of a fresh wound. "That sounds wonderful," Anna said warmly. "Your mom must have been very creative." "She was the best at everything," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "Dad has pictures if you want to see." "Ethan," Daniel warned, but Anna shook her head. "I'd love to see them if your dad doesn't mind." After dinner, they moved to the living room where Sarah's presence was still evident in every carefully chosen detail. Her books still filled the shelves, her throw pillows still brightened the old couch. Her photographs still smiled from their frames. Daniel had left everything exactly as it was, partly from grief, and partly because changing anything felt like erasing her memory. Anna studied the photos with careful attention, as if she were memorizing faces for a test. "She was beautiful," she said softly, stopping before their wedding picture. "Inside and out," Daniel replied. "Ethan has her smile. And her kind heart, I think." They spent the next hour looking through photo albums while Ethan provided running commentary on every picture. Anna listened with genuine interest, asking questions about holidays and vacations, laughing at stories of Ethan's baby antics. She seemed to understand instinctively that Sarah wasn't a forbidden topic, but a cherished part of their family history. "This one's my favorite," Ethan said, pointing to a photo taken the summer before Sarah got sick. All three of them were at the county fair, cotton candy sticky and sunburned Sarah in the middle with her arms around her two boys. The happiness in the picture was so pure, it was almost painful to look at. "You can see how much you all loved each other," Anna said quietly. "Yeah," Ethan sighed. "I miss her every day. But Dad says she's still with us, just in a different way." Anna's eyes found Daniel's across the room. "Your dad is a very wise man." As the evening wore on, Daniel found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in months. Anna had a gift for drawing people out, for making them feel heard and understood. She listened to Ethan's elaborate plans for his art contest entry with the same attention she gave Daniel's stories about difficult repairs at the garage. She fit into their evening routine as if she'd always been there, helping clear dishes and laughing at Ethan's terrible jokes. But underneath her easy presence, Daniel sensed something else. A careful watchfulness, as if she were studying them as much as enjoying their company. It wasn't predatory or calculating, more like someone trying to memorize details of a beautiful dream before waking up. "I should probably get going," Anna said reluctantly as Ethan's bedtime approached. "Thank you for dinner, and for letting me intrude on your evening." "You weren't intruding," Daniel said, meaning it. "It was nice having company." "Will you come back?" Ethan asked hopefully. "I want to show you my painting of the mountains when it's finished." Anna's smile was soft, but tinged with something Daniel couldn't quite identify. "I'd like that very much." Daniel walked her to her rental car. She'd mentioned staying at the motel on the outskirts of town while her Honda was being repaired. The night air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and overhead stars pricked the velvet sky like scattered diamonds. "Thank you," Anna said as she reached for her car door. "Tonight was exactly what I needed." "Rough day." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Rough few years more like." Daniel wanted to ask more, to understand the sadness that shadowed her eyes even when she smiled, but he recognized the walls when he saw them. He'd built enough of his own. "Well, you're welcome back any time. Ethan's already planning your next visit, I'm sure." "And you?" The question slipped out before Anna could stop it, vulnerability flickering across her features. "Would you like me to come back?" The honest answer surprised Daniel with its intensity. "Yes," he said simply. "I would." Something passed between them in the darkness. Not quite attraction, not quite friendship, but the recognition of two wounded souls finding unexpected comfort in each other's presence. "Good," Anna whispered, "because I'd very much like to see you both again." She drove away into the night, leaving Daniel standing in his driveway with a feeling he couldn't quite name stirring in his chest. For the first time in 2 years, the future felt like something other than an endless repetition of barely managed survival. Inside the house, Ethan was supposed to be getting ready for bed, but Daniel found him at his bedroom window watching the taillights of Anna's car disappear down the road. "She's nice, Dad." "Yeah, she is. Do you think she's lonely like we are sometimes?" Daniel joined his son at the window, putting a gentle hand on his narrow shoulder. "What makes you think that?" "The way she looked at our pictures of Mom, like she was trying to remember what it felt like to be that happy." Once again, Daniel was struck by his son's perceptive wisdom. "Maybe she is, buddy. Maybe she is. I hope she comes back tomorrow. Her car won't be ready until the day after tomorrow." I didn't mean for her car, Ethan said solemnly. I meant for us. That night, Daniel lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about green eyes and soft laughter and the way Anna had looked at Sarah's photographs. Not with jealousy or discomfort, but with the kind of reverent attention usually reserved for sacred things. There was a mystery there, layers of carefully constructed story that didn't quite add up. The modest clothes that couldn't quite hide expensive taste. The rental car when she'd claimed to own the Honda. The way she'd hesitated before answering simple questions about herself. The pencil that had looked more like something an artist would use than a casual sketching tool. But more than the mystery was the feeling Anna had left behind. A sense of possibility Daniel hadn't experienced since Sarah's diagnosis. Not romantic possibility, not yet, but something subtler and perhaps more precious. The possibility of connection, of finding someone who understood that life was complicated and loss was real, and healing didn't follow neat timelines. 30 miles away, in a luxury suite that cost more per night than Daniel made in a week, Isabella Drake sat by the window overlooking the town where she'd spent the most genuine evening of her adult life. She'd shed the modest clothes and careful posture of Anna Miller, but she couldn't shed the memory of Ethan's earnest face or the way Daniel's eyes had softened when he talked about his wife. She'd lied to them. Every word, every carefully constructed detail of Anna Miller's backstory was a fabrication designed to let her experience their world without the complicating factor of her wealth and status. It had started as simple curiosity. She'd hired a private investigator to find Daniel Hayes after that night 2 years ago, wanting to properly thank him for his kindness. But the more she'd learned about his life, the more she'd wanted to see it for herself. The investigator had been thorough. Daniel Hayes, widower, age 32, father to Ethan Hayes, age 10. Wife Sarah died of ovarian cancer 2 years prior. Currently employed at Morrison's Auto Repair. Good worker, quiet, keeps to himself. Lives modestly, but pays his bills on time. Well regarded in the community, though he doesn't socialize much since his wife's death. The facts had painted a picture of dignified struggle, of a man doing his best to hold his small family together in the face of devastating loss. But the facts couldn't capture what Isabella had witnessed tonight. The profound love that still filled their home, the way father and son had created a world where grief and joy coexisted, where Sarah's memory was honored rather than hidden. Isabella had grown up in a world where love was complicated by money, where affection came with price tags and ulterior motives. Her parents had loved her, she supposed, but their love had been filtered through expectations and public image and the crushing weight of family legacy. Friends were really business associates. Romantic partners were really strategic alliances, and genuine emotion was a luxury the Drake family couldn't afford. But tonight, in that modest kitchen, eating simple spaghetti and listening to a 10-year-old's earnest chatter, Isabella had tasted something she'd thought existed only in movies and romance novels. Authentic human connection, uncompromised by calculation or agenda. And she wanted more. The rational part of her mind knew this was dangerous territory. Every day she maintained the Anna Miller deception, made the eventual truth harder to bear. Daniel and Ethan were good people who deserved honesty, not elaborate lies designed to satisfy her hunger for authenticity. But the lonely part of her mind, the part that had been slowly starving in her gilded cage of wealth and obligation, whispered that she deserved this too. Just for a little while. Just long enough to remember what it felt like to be valued for herself rather than her bank account. Tomorrow she would go back. Not as Isabella Drake, billionaire heiress, but as Anna Miller, woman of modest means passing through town. She would visit the garage again, maybe share another meal with Daniel, and Ethan let herself pretend for just a few more days that she was the kind of person who could belong in their uncomplicated world. What could it hurt? She would be careful, she told herself. She would keep the deception light, harmless. And when her curiosity was satisfied, when she'd had her fill of playing ordinary, she would disappear as quietly as she'd come. Daniel and Ethan would remember Anna Miller fondly, if they remembered her at all, and Isabella would return to her real life enriched by the memory of what authentic happiness looked like. It was a perfect plan. Clean, contained, safe for everyone involved. Isabella had no way of knowing that the heart doesn't recognize the boundaries we set for it, that love grows in the spaces between our carefully laid plans. She couldn't foresee that her hunger for authenticity would become a craving that no amount of pretense could satisfy, or that Daniel and Ethan Hayes would become not just objects of curiosity, but irreplaceable parts of a life she hadn't known she wanted. The deception that had started as harmless curiosity was already becoming something more dangerous, a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman who had forgotten she was capable of being saved. The deception that had begun as simple curiosity bloomed into something far more complex over the following weeks. Anna Miller became a regular fixture at Morrison's auto repair, always finding new reasons to return. A strange noise here, a maintenance question there, sometimes just stopping by with coffee for the mechanics during her walks around town. Daniel found himself looking forward to her visits with an anticipation that both warmed and worried him. "You know, her car's running better than most vehicles half its age," Jerry observed one afternoon watching Anna chat with Ethan, while Daniel worked under the hood of a pickup truck. "Makes a man wonder what she's really coming around here for." Daniel's wrench slipped, scraping his knuckles against the engine block. "Maybe she just likes the company." Jerry's weathered face crinkled into a knowing smile. "Oh, I'm sure she does. Question is, whose company is she really after?" Before Daniel could formulate a response, Anna's laughter rang out across the garage. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor next to Ethan, helping him with what appeared to be a complicated art project involving colored pencils and careful shading techniques. The sight of them together, his son's dark head bent close to Anna's as she guided his hand across the paper, created an ache in Daniel's chest that he wasn't quite ready to examine. "Dad, come look," Ethan called, excitement bubbling in his voice. "Anna's teaching me how to draw light." Daniel wiped his hands on his coveralls and approached their impromptu art lesson. The drawing Ethan had been working on, a landscape featuring the mountains visible from their house, had been transformed under Anna's guidance. What had been a flat, childish sketch now showed genuine depth and dimension, with shadows and highlights that made the scene come alive on the page. "This is incredible, buddy," Daniel said, meaning it. "You've really improved." "Anna says I have natural talent," Ethan beamed. "She thinks I could be a real artist someday." Daniel glanced at Anna, who was watching his reaction with careful attention. "She's right. You've got a gift." "Art runs in families sometimes," Anna said softly. "Was anyone else in your family artistic?" "Sarah was," Daniel replied without thinking, then felt the familiar tightness in his throat. "She used to paint watercolors. Nothing professional, just for the joy of it." Anna's expression grew thoughtful. "I'd love to see her work sometime, if you wouldn't mind sharing." That evening, for the first time since Sarah's death, Daniel found himself pulling out the canvases his wife had stacked in their bedroom closet. Sarah's paintings were scattered throughout their home. Gentle landscapes, abstract florals, a few portraits of Ethan as a baby. But her serious work, the pieces she'd considered her best, had been carefully stored away. Anna held each canvas with reverent care, studying the brushstrokes and color choices with the intensity of someone who truly understood the medium. "She was gifted," she said finally. "Really gifted." Look at how she captured the morning light in this one, the way it filters through the trees. You can almost feel the warmth of it. She painted that the summer before she got sick," Daniel said, his voice thick with memory. "We'd taken Ethan camping up at Pine Lake, and Sarah got up early every morning to paint the sunrise. She said she wanted to capture what perfect moments looked like." Anna touched the painted surface gently, as if she could feel the love that had gone into every brushstroke. She succeeded. This is what happiness looks like." Something in her voice made Daniel look at her more closely. Anna was staring at the painting with an expression of such profound longing that it took his breath away. "Anna, are you all right?" She blinked, seeming to come back to herself. "I'm sorry. It's just," she saw beauty in simple things. "That's rare." "You sound like you know something about art yourself." Again, that careful pause that had become Anna's trademark. "I studied it in college. Different lifetime, though." Daniel wanted to push to understand the sadness that seemed to shadow Anna's past, but something in her posture warned him off. Instead, he said, "Sarah would have liked you. She always said the measure of a person was how they saw the world, whether they looked for beauty or just focused on the broken parts." "And what do you see when you look at the world?" Anna asked quietly. Daniel considered the question seriously. "Lately, I try to see what Ethan sees. Wonder, possibility, reasons to keep going. Some days it's easier than others." "You're a good father," Anna said with quiet certainty. "Sarah would be proud of the man you're raising." "Some days I feel like I'm failing him, like I'm not enough to make up for what he's lost." "Nobody could make up for losing his mother," Anna replied gently. "But you're giving him something just as valuable. The knowledge that he's loved unconditionally, that he matters, that his dreams are worth pursuing. That's more than a lot of children have." Her words carried a weight that suggested personal experience, but before Daniel could ask what she meant, Ethan bounded into the room with his latest drawing clutched in his hands. "Look, I finished the one of Anna." Daniel's breath caught. Ethan had drawn Anna as she'd appeared that first day in the garage, sitting on the milk crate watching Daniel work, her face peaceful and attentive. But with a child's intuitive artistry, Ethan had captured something Daniel hadn't consciously noticed, the way Anna looked at their world with wonder, as if she were seeing something magical that others took for granted. "Ethan, this is beautiful," Anna whispered, and Daniel was surprised to see tears gathering in her eyes. "Is this really how you see me?" "It's how you look when you think nobody's watching," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "Like you're trying to memorize everything." Anna's composure cracked completely. She pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she managed. "I don't know why I'm—" "Hey," Daniel said softly, moving closer. "It's okay. Whatever it is, it's okay." But Anna was already gathering herself, rebuilding the careful walls Daniel had watched her construct whenever emotions threatened to overwhelm her. "I should go, it's getting late." "Anna, wait." But she was already heading for the door, leaving behind only the faint scent of her perfume and the echo of suppressed tears. Daniel found her sitting in her car in his driveway, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Anna." He tapped gently on the passenger window. After a moment's hesitation, she unlocked the doors, and he slid into the seat beside her. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of unspoken truths filling the small space between them. "I'm not who you think I am," Anna said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know." She turned to look at him, surprise evident on her tear-stained face. "You know, I know you're running from something. I know you're hurting. I know there's a story you're not telling. Daniel's voice was gentle but direct. What I don't know is whether it matters. It should matter, Anna said desperately. It should matter that I've been lying to you from the moment we met. Have you been lying about who you are, or just about the details of your life? The question seemed to catch Anna off guard. What? The woman who sat in my garage and watched me work, who helped my son with his art, who looked at my wife's paintings like they were sacred things. Was that real, or was that part of the lie, too? Anna stared at him, tears flowing freely now. That was real. That was the most real I've been in years. Then maybe the details don't matter as much as you think they do. You don't understand, Anna said, shaking her head. The details are complicated, really complicated. Daniel reached across the console and gently took her hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. Try me. For a moment, Anna seemed on the verge of confession. Her lips parted, and Daniel could see the words forming, ready to spill out, in a rush of honesty that would change everything between them. But then her phone rang. The sound cut through the intimate atmosphere like a blade. Anna glanced at the caller ID and went pale. I have to take this to Ma, she said, her voice suddenly formal, distant. I'm sorry, I have to. She answered the phone before Daniel could respond. Yes, I understand. No, I'll handle it personally. I'll be back in the city by tomorrow afternoon. She ended the call and sat for a moment staring at the phone as if it were a poisonous snake. You have to leave, Daniel said. It wasn't a question. Yes, there's a situation that requires my attention. How long will you be gone? Anna's laugh was bitter. I don't know. Maybe it's better if I don't come back. Anna, you deserve better than this, Rong, she said, turning to face him fully. You and Ethan, both. You deserve someone who can be honest with you, someone who doesn't come with complications you can't even imagine. What if I told you I don't care about complications? You would. If you knew the truth, you'd care. Daniel studied her face in the dim light from the street lamp, seeing the war between longing and fear playing out in her green eyes. What if you're wrong? I can't take that chance, Anna whispered. I can't risk destroying what we have, even if it's built on lies. She leaned across the console then and kissed him. Soft, desperate tasting of tears and regret. It was over almost before it began, but the warmth of it lingered long after she'd pulled away. Take care of yourself, Daniel Hayes, she said, and he heard goodbye in every syllable. Anna was gone before dawn, leaving behind only a note slipped under Daniel's front door. Thank you for reminding me what happiness looks like. Please don't look for me. Oh. The weeks that followed Anna's departure stretched like a gray winter that wouldn't end. Daniel threw himself into work with renewed intensity, staying late at the garage, taking on extra projects, anything to avoid the empty silence of his house. But Ethan's questions were relentless. When is Anna coming back? I don't know, buddy. Did we do something wrong? No, we didn't do anything wrong. Then why did she leave? Daniel had no answer for that. How could he explain to a 10-year-old that sometimes adults made choices based on fear rather than love, that sometimes people ran away from the very things they wanted most? The worst part was watching Ethan's light dim. His son continued working on his art, but the joy had gone out of it. The drawings became darker, more subdued, as if Anna's absence had drained the color from his world. Maybe she forgot about us, Ethan said one evening, staring at the unfinished portrait he'd been working on. a family picture that included Anna sitting at their kitchen table. "She didn't forget," Daniel said firmly. "Some things are just complicated. Adult complicated or kid complicated. Adult complicated." Ethan considered this with the serious expression he wore when processing difficult concepts. "Dad, do you think she was sad like us?" "What do you mean, Wo?" "Like how we were sad after Mom died, but we were also happy sometimes too. Like we could feel both things at the same time." Daniel's throat tightened. "Yeah, buddy, I think maybe she was exactly that kind of sad." 3 months passed. Daniel had almost convinced himself that he was moving on, that Anna Miller had been exactly what she'd claimed. A woman passing through town who'd moved on to whatever came next. He'd stopped looking for her car in the garage parking lot, stopped hoping she'd walk through the door with that careful smile and some manufactured reason for needing automotive assistance. Then Marcus Webb walked into Morrison's Auto Repair on a Tuesday afternoon in March, and Daniel's carefully reconstructed world shifted on its axis. Webb was the kind of man who wore expensive suits like armor. His silver hair perfectly styled, his handshake calculated to convey exactly the right amount of firmness and authority. Everything about him screamed corporate power, from his Italian leather shoes to the way he surveyed the garage with the cool assessment of someone evaluating an acquisition. "Mr. Hayes." Webb's voice was smooth-cultured, completely out of place among the oil stains and tool benches. "I wonder if I might have a word with you." Daniel set down his wrench and straightened, instantly wary. "About what?" "About Anna Miller. Or rather, about the woman you knew as Anna Miller." The garage seemed to tilt around Daniel. "I'm sorry, what?" Webb reached into his jacket and produced a tablet, swiping to a photograph that made Daniel's blood run cold. It was Anna, unmistakably Anna, but not the modest woman in jeans and simple blouses who'd sat in his garage. This Anna wore an elegant black dress that probably cost more than Daniel's truck. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo, diamonds glittered at her throat, and she was shaking hands with someone Daniel vaguely recognized as a politician. "Her name is Isabella Drake," Webb said, watching Daniel's reaction carefully. "She's the CEO of Drake Industries, one of the largest art and antiquities companies in the world, worth approximately $3.2 billion. Daniel stared at the photograph, his mind struggling to reconcile the woman he'd known with the polished stranger on the screen. That can't be." "I'm afraid it is. Miss Drake has been playing a role, you might say. For reasons I'm still trying to understand, she's been pretending to be someone she's not." The garage was spinning now, Daniel's carefully ordered world cracking along fault lines he hadn't known existed. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because she's disappeared, Mr. Hayes. 3 months ago, Isabella Drake simply vanished from her life. Her board of directors is in crisis, her company is hemorrhaging value, and no one has seen or heard from her since the night she left this town." "I don't understand." "She said she had a situation that required her attention." "There was no situation," Webb interrupted. "There was only a panicked phone call from her personal assistant asking where she was because she'd missed a crucial board meeting. A meeting that, had she attended, might have prevented the current catastrophe her company is facing." Daniel slumped against his workbench, the implications of Webb's words washing over him like ice water. "You're saying she chose to disappear, that she's been hiding for 3 months. I'm saying that a woman worth billions of dollars walked away from everything she's ever known, and the last confirmed sighting anyone has of her was in this garage working on cars with a mechanic named Daniel Hayes." Webb swiped to another photograph, this one clearly taken by a private investigator with a telephoto lens. It showed Anna sitting on the milk crate in the garage laughing at something Ethan had said. Even in the grainy surveillance photo, her happiness was evident. "She looks different," Webb observed. "Lighter, more alive than I've seen her in years." "You know her. I've been her family's attorney for over 20 years. I've watched Isabella Drake sacrifice piece after piece of herself to the demands of her position until there was almost nothing left of the woman she used to be." Webb closed the tablet and studied Daniel with shrewd eyes. "Until she met you." "This is insane," Daniel said, running his hands through his hair. "You're telling me that Isabella, is some kind of billionaire who threw away her entire life to play house with a small-town mechanic?" "I'm telling you that Isabella Drake found something here that she couldn't find in all her wealth and privilege. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "What do you mean?" Webb reached into his jacket again and pulled out a business card. "She's in trouble, Mr. Hayes. Real trouble. Her disappearance has left her company vulnerable to a hostile takeover. There are people who would very much like to see Isabella Drake destroyed, and her absence has given them the opportunity they've been waiting for." Daniel stared at the card. Heavy stock embossed lettering, everything about it expensive and official. "Why are you telling me this? What do you want?" "I want you to help me find her before it's too late." "I told you I don't know where she is. She left and I haven't heard from her since." "But you could find her," Webb pressed. "She cares about you, about your son. If anyone could convince her to come back and fight for what's hers, it would be you." Daniel's laugh was harsh, bitter. "You want me to track down a woman who's been lying to me for months and convince her to return to a life she obviously wanted to escape. That's your plan." "My plan is to save a woman I've watched grow up from a child into someone who forgot how to be happy until she met you." Webb's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing genuine emotion underneath. "Isabella Drake has been alone her entire life, Mr. Hayes. Surrounded by people, but utterly alone. For the first time in 20 years, I saw her smile in those surveillance photos. Really smile. Don't you think that's worth fighting for?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, staring at the business card in his hands. When he looked up, Webb was surprised to see anger in his eyes. "You want to know what I think is worth fighting for? Honesty. Trust. The kind of relationship where you don't have to hire private investigators to find out who you're talking to." Daniel's voice was low controlled, but Webb could hear the fury underneath. "She lied to me. To my son. She made us care about her and then disappeared without a word of explanation. Because she was afraid." "Of what? That I'd care about her anyway. That maybe money doesn't matter as much as she thinks it does." Webb studied Daniel's face, seeing the pain behind the anger. "You're in love with her." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Daniel wanted to deny it to protect himself from the vulnerability of admitting feelings for a woman who might not even exist. But the truth was written in every sleepless night since Anna's departure, in every time he'd caught himself looking for her car, in the way his chest ached whenever Ethan asked when she was coming home. "The woman I fell in love with was Anna Miller," Daniel said finally. "I don't know who Isabella Drake is." "They're the same person," Webb said quietly. "The woman who helped your son with his art, who looked at your wife's paintings with reverence, who found peace in the simple act of watching you work. That was Isabella. Everything else was just details. Details like $3 billion, details like a life she didn't trust me enough to share. Details like a prison she's been trapped in since childhood," Webb countered. "Details like expectations and obligations that would crush most people. She didn't lie about who she was, Mr. Hayes. She lied about what she was trapped by. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, turning the business card over in his hands. Finally, he looked up at Webb with eyes that held both determination and fear. If I do this, if I help you find her, what happens then? What happens to us? I don't know, Webb admitted. But I know that Isabella Drake is miserable without you, and from what I can see, you're pretty miserable without her. Maybe it's time to find out if love is stronger than the obstacles we put in its way. That evening, Daniel sat Ethan down for the hardest conversation of his young life. He'd always tried to be honest with his son about the big things, death loss, the complications of adult life. But this felt different. This felt like asking a child to help navigate waters that most adults would find treacherous. Remember Anna? Daniel began, his stomach churning with anxiety. Ethan's face lit up instantly. Is she coming back? Did you hear from her? Not exactly, but I found out some things about her that I need to tell you. Daniel explained as gently as he could. Anna's real name, her wealth, the reasons she might have felt the need to pretend to be someone else. He watched his son's face, carefully looking for signs of anger or betrayal, but Ethan listened with the serious attention he gave to all important information. So, she's really rich? Ethan asked when Daniel finished. Really rich. But she's still Anna. She still helped me with my drawings and laughed at my jokes and liked Mom's paintings. Yes, that part was real. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the gravity of someone much older. Finally, he looked up at Daniel with eyes that held wisdom beyond his years. Dad, I think Anna was sad because she didn't know if people liked her or just her money. Daniel's throat tightened. What makes you say that? Because that's how I felt after Mom died. Like maybe people were only being nice to me because they felt sorry for me, not because they actually liked me. Ethan's voice was matter-of-fact, but Daniel could hear the old pain underneath. Anna probably thought that if we knew about her money, we might not want to be her friend anymore. And how would you feel about that? About being friends with someone who has that much money? Ethan shrugged, the gesture so reminiscent of his mother that Daniel's chest ached. Money doesn't make you a good person or a bad person. Mom used to say that. She said what mattered was how you treated people, especially when you didn't have to be nice to them. And how did Anna treat us? Like we mattered, Ethan said without hesitation. Like our feelings were important. Like she actually wanted to be here. He paused, then added with devastating simplicity, I miss her, Dad. I miss her a lot. Me too, buddy, me too. Are we going to try to find her? Daniel looked at his son. This wise, resilient boy who'd learned too young that love was precious and fragile and worth fighting for. Would you want to, even knowing that everything might change? Everything already changed when she left, Ethan pointed out. Maybe if we find her, we can figure out how to make it better. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Daniel sat at his kitchen table and stared at Marcus Webb's business card. The house felt emptier than it had since those first terrible months after Sarah's death, as if Anna's presence had awakened something that now lay dormant and aching. He thought about what Webb had said, that Isabella Drake had been trapped in a life that gave her everything except the one thing that mattered most, the freedom to be herself. He thought about the way Anna had looked at Sarah's paintings, the reverence in her touch, the longing in her eyes when she'd talked about her abandoned art career. He thought about Ethan's wisdom about the difference between loving someone for what they had and loving them for who they were. Most of all, he thought about the woman who'd sat in his garage and found peace in the simple act of watching him work, who'd helped his son discover his artistic gifts, who'd looked at their small, broken family and seen something worth staying for. The details were staggering. $3 billion, a corporate empire, a world Daniel couldn't begin to understand. But underneath all of that was Anna, the woman who'd cried looking at Ethan's drawing, who'd kissed him with desperate longing in the front seat of her car, who'd found her way back to herself in the space between his world and hers. Daniel picked up his phone and dialed the number on Webb's card. "Webb speaking. It's Daniel Hayes. If you can help me find her, I'm in." There was a pause, then Webb's voice warm with something that might have been relief. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. I think you may be the only person who can save her." "I'm not trying to save her," Daniel corrected. "I'm trying to bring her home." Because that's what their house had become during Anna's time there. Home. Not just for him and Ethan, but for a lost woman who'd found her way back to herself in the most unlikely place. And if there was a chance, any chance at all, that they could rebuild what had been broken by fear and lies and the crushing weight of impossible circumstances, Daniel was willing to fight for it. Even if it meant stepping into a world where a worn pencil and honest work weren't enough, where love would have to prove itself stronger than money and power and all the forces that had driven Isabella Drake to disappear from her own life. The real question wasn't whether he could find her. The real question was whether the woman he found would still be Anna underneath all those billions, and whether love could survive the collision between two worlds that seemed to have no common ground except the fragile hope that authenticity mattered more than anything else. The search for Isabella Drake began in the most unlikely place, a rundown motel on the outskirts of a forgotten town, 300 miles from anything resembling civilization. Webb's network of private investigators had tracked credit card purchases and security camera footage across half the country, following a ghost trail of cash transactions and deliberately obscured identities. But it was Ethan, with his 10-year-old's intuitive understanding of human nature, who provided the breakthrough. "She's painting again," he announced matter-of-factly, as they sat in Webb's luxury sedan, reviewing the latest batch of leads. "That's why you can't find her. She's somewhere she can paint." Webb glanced at Daniel in the rearview mirror, skepticism clear in his eyes. "What makes you think that?" "Because that's what I would do," Ethan replied with the simple certainty of childhood logic. "When I'm really sad, I draw. When Mom died, I drew pictures of her every day until Dad said it was okay to be happy sometimes too. Anna was sad about her old life, so she's probably painting pictures of her new one." Daniel felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever Ethan displayed wisdom beyond his years. "Art supply stores," he said suddenly. "If she's painting, she needs supplies. Good supplies. The kind you can't just pick up at a grocery store." Webb was already reaching for his phone. "I'll have my people check every art supply purchase in a 200-mile radius." The lead came through 18 hours later. A small art store in Cedar Falls, Colorado, population 847, had reported an unusual customer, a woman paying cash for professional-grade oil paints, canvas, and brushes. The store owner remembered her because she'd bought enough supplies to stock a small studio, and because she'd seemed to know exactly what she wanted, despite claiming to be getting back into painting after a long break. The description matched dark hair, green eyes, quiet demeanor, and hands that the store owner described as too soft for someone who claimed to be a struggling artist. "That's her," Daniel said with certainty, studying the grainy security footage on Webb's tablet. Even with her hair pulled back and wearing clothes that had clearly seen better days, Isabella's posture was unmistakable. "That's Anna." Cedar Falls turned out to be the kind of town that time had forgotten. A former mining community nestled in a valley between two mountain ranges, where the main street consisted of a post office, a diner, and a handful of stores that barely scraped by on the occasional tourist traffic. The kind of place where a woman could disappear completely, where people minded their own business and paid cash for everything. They found her cabin on the third day of searching. It sat at the end of a dirt road that wound through pine trees and across a creek that ran cold and clear even in the summer heat. The cabin itself was small and weathered, the kind of place city people rented for weekend getaways and forgot about for the rest of the year. Smoke curled from the chimney despite the warm weather, and through the windows Daniel could see the warm glow of artificial light. Someone was definitely living there. "Should we all go up together?" Webb asked, his voice tight with an anxiety that had been building for days. "No," Daniel said firmly. "Ethan and I go alone. If she sees you, she'll run again." Webb looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Daniel's expression stopped him. 15 minutes, he said finally. "If you're not back in 15 minutes, I'm coming up there." Daniel nodded and took Ethan's hand. Together they walked up the narrow path to the cabin, their footsteps crunching on pine needles and scattered gravel. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs as they approached the front door, 3 months of questions and hurt and desperate hope all compressed into this single moment. He knocked gently, the sound echoing in the mountain silence. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then they heard footsteps inside, slow and hesitant. The door opened a crack, revealing a slice of Isabella's face. Thinner than he remembered, paler, but unmistakably her. Her eyes went wide when she saw them, and Daniel heard her sharp intake of breath. "Hello, Anna," he said softly. The door opened fully, and Daniel's heart broke at what he saw. This was Isabella Drake, billionaire heiress, but she looked nothing like the polished woman from Webb's photographs. Her hair was longer, unstyled, held back with what appeared to be a piece of twine. Her clothes were paint-stained and well-worn. Her hands were rough from work, her nails short and practical. But it was her eyes that struck him most. Haunted, exhausted, but somehow more alive than they'd ever been when she was Anna Miller. "How did you find me?" she whispered. "I helped," Ethan said, stepping forward with the fearless honesty that belonged only to children. "I told Dad you'd be painting, and I was right, wasn't I?" Isabella's composure cracked completely. She dropped to her knees in front of Ethan, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, sweetheart, I missed you so much." Ethan wrapped his arms around her neck without hesitation. "I missed you too, we both did. Dad's been really sad, but he pretended he wasn't, because he thought it would make me feel better." Over Ethan's head, Isabella's eyes met Daniel's. The pain he saw there was so raw, so deep, that it took his breath away. "You shouldn't have come," she said, even as she held Ethan tighter. "You don't understand what you've walked into." "Then explain it to me," Daniel said simply. "No more lies, no more half-truths. Just tell me what's really going on." Isabella stood slowly, keeping one hand on Ethan's shoulder, as if she needed the connection to stay grounded. "Come inside. But Daniel, after you hear what I have to say, you're going to wish you'd never found me." The cabin's interior was a revelation. What had once been a simple vacation rental had been transformed into an artist's studio. Canvases lined every wall, some finished, others in various stages of completion. The air smelled of turpentine and oil paint, and the peculiar intensity that came from creative work done in solitude. But it was the paintings themselves that made Daniel stop and stare. They were landscapes mostly. The mountains visible from the cabin, the creek that ran behind it, the pine forests that stretched endlessly in all directions. But scattered among them were other scenes: a small-town garage, a kitchen table set for 3, a bedroom where children's drawings covered the walls. Memories of their life together painted with the kind of desperate precision that suggested someone trying to hold on to something precious that was slipping away. "You've been painting us," Ethan said, with wonder moving from canvas to canvas. "Look, Dad, that's our house, and that's you working on Mrs. Patterson's car." Isabella watched Ethan explore her makeshift gallery, her expression a mixture of pride and profound sadness. "I had to," she said quietly. "I had to make sure I remembered every detail. I was afraid if I didn't paint them, the memories would fade, and they were all I had left of being happy." "Why did you leave?" Daniel asked, though he thought he was beginning to understand. Isabella gestured for them to sit on the worn couch that faced the largest window. Outside, the mountains stretched away into the distance, purple and gold in the afternoon light. "Because I'm a coward," she said simply. "Because the night I left, I got a phone call from my assistant. The board was asking questions about my absences, about why I'd been canceling meetings and neglecting my responsibilities. They were starting to get suspicious. So I panicked. I realized that if they found out about you and Ethan, they'd want to know why Isabella Drake was spending time with a mechanic in small-town Pennsylvania. They'd dig into your lives, scrutinize every interaction, probably conclude that you were somehow taking advantage of me." Daniel felt anger flare in his chest. "And that's what you think? That I was taking advantage of you?" "No." Isabella's response was immediate and fierce. "No, I know that's not true. But they wouldn't see it that way. They'd see a grieving widower and his son who somehow managed to enchant a billionaire. They'd make your life hell trying to prove you were scheming to get access to my money. So you decided to disappear instead. I decided to protect you the only way I knew how." Isabella's voice broke slightly. "I thought if I vanished, if I just stopped being Isabella Drake for a while, maybe I could figure out how to have both lives. Maybe I could find a way to be with you without destroying everything good in your world." Ethan had been listening to this exchange with the serious attention he gave to all adult conversations he couldn't quite understand. Now he climbed onto the couch between Daniel and Isabella, looking back and forth between them, with the clear intention of solving this problem through pure logic. "Why can't you just give the money away?" he asked. "Then you could be Anna again, and nobody would care about us." Isabella's laugh was hollow. "It's not that simple, sweetheart. The money comes with responsibilities. Companies that employ thousands of people, foundations that support artists and education programs, museums that depend on our donations. I can't just walk away from all of that." "But you did walk away," Daniel pointed out. "You've been gone for 3 months. What's happened to all those responsibilities?" Isabella's face went ashen. "I don't know. I've been too afraid to find out." Before Daniel could respond, they heard a car door slam outside. Through the window, they could see Webb approaching the cabin, his expression grim. "Isabella," he called through the door. "We need to talk. Now." Isabella closed her eyes, and Daniel could see her summoning the composure that had carried her through years of corporate boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. When she opened the door for Webb, she was once again the billionaire heiress, despite her paint-stained clothes and makeshift studio. "Marcus," she said coolly, "I suppose this was inevitable." Webb stepped inside, his eyes taking in the transformed cabin with professional assessment. 3 months, Isabella. 3 months you've been hiding while your company burns. I needed time to think. Time to think. Webb's voice rose with uncharacteristic emotion. While you've been playing artist in the mountains, Victoria Ashford has been systematically dismantling everything your family built. She's convinced the board that you've had some kind of breakdown, that you're unfit to lead the company. Isabella went very still. Victoria. She's been planning this takeover for years, waiting for the right moment. Your disappearance gave her exactly what she needed. The board voted yesterday. You've been removed as CEO pending a psychological evaluation. Daniel watched the color drain from Isabella's face. They can't do that. They can, and they have. Victoria's got them convinced that your erratic behavior over the past year, the missed meetings, the unexplained absences, the general disengagement, proves you're not competent to run a multi-billion-dollar corporation. What's a takeover? Ethan asked, and Daniel was grateful for his son's question, because he wasn't entirely sure himself. Webb glanced at the boy, then at Daniel, clearly struggling with how much to explain. It means someone else is trying to steal Isabella's company, someone who's been waiting for her to make a mistake so they could swoop in and take everything her family worked for. Can they do that? Daniel asked. They're doing it, Webb replied grimly. Victoria's been building support among the shareholders for months. She's convinced them that Isabella's recent behavior shows she's not stable enough to lead the company. The board's recommendation carries enormous weight with the shareholders. Isabella sank into a chair, her hands shaking. How long do I have? The shareholders vote next week. If Victoria gets 51%, she'll have controlling interest. Drake Industries will effectively become hers. And if she gets control, Webb's expression was grim. She's already announced her intention to restructure the company. That means massive layoffs, selling off the art foundations, closing the educational programs. Everything your family built to give back to the community. She sees it as dead weight that's hurting the bottom line. Daniel felt Ethan's hand slip into his as the boy processed this information. She sounds mean, Ethan said quietly. She is mean, Isabella replied, and Daniel was struck by how young she sounded. Victoria's been my father's protégé since before I was born. She's brilliant, ruthless, and she's always resented that the company would go to me instead of her when my father retired. Then why did your father choose you? Daniel asked. Isabella was quiet for a long moment. Because he believed in giving back, in using our success to lift others up. Victoria sees charity as weakness, art, as frivolous education programs, as expenses that don't generate revenue. She looked around at her paintings, at the evidence of the creativity she'd rediscovered in her exile. She'd destroy everything that makes Drake Industries more than just another corporation. So fight her, Daniel said simply. Isabella laughed bitterly. With what I've been gone for 3 months, half the board probably thinks I'm having a nervous breakdown. The other half thinks I'm irresponsible and selfish. How am I supposed to convince them I'm fit to lead when I can't even explain where I've been? You tell them the truth, Ethan said, with the matter-of-fact certainty that belonged only to children. You tell them you were sad and needed to remember how to be happy. It's not that simple, sweetheart. Why not? Isabella looked at this earnest boy who'd become so precious to her, and Daniel could see her struggling with how to explain the complexities of corporate politics to someone who saw the world in terms of basic human emotions. Because in my world, being sad isn't an acceptable excuse for anything. Being happy isn't considered important. What matters is profit margins and market share and keeping the shareholders satisfied. That sounds like a terrible world, Ethan said solemnly. It is, Isabella admitted. That's why I left. Webb had been listening to this exchange with growing impatience. This is all very touching, he said finally, but we don't have time for philosophical discussions. If you want to save your company, Isabella, we need to get back to New York immediately. We need to start rebuilding your relationships with the board members, convince them that whatever drove you away has been resolved. And how do I do that without explaining where I've been? You tell them you were dealing with a personal crisis. You don't owe them details about your private life. Isabella stood and walked to the window, staring out at the mountains that had been her sanctuary for 3 months. And then what? I go back to the life I was living before. The endless meetings and corporate functions and days where I don't see sunlight except through conference room windows. You do what you have to do to save thousands of jobs and millions of dollars in charitable funding, Webb replied pragmatically. Marcus is right, Daniel said quietly, and Isabella turned to look at him in surprise. You can't let someone destroy what your family built. Too many people are counting on you. But what about us? Isabella's voice was barely a whisper. What about this? She gestured between them, encompassing the fragile relationship they'd built and lost, and were somehow rebuilding in this mountain cabin. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was steady, despite the pain Isabella could hear underneath. We'll figure it out. After you save your company, after you stop this Victoria person from destroying everything you care about, then we'll figure out how to make this work. You don't understand the kind of life I'd be going back to, Isabella said desperately. The scrutiny, the pressure, the constant demands. There wouldn't be room for quiet evenings or garage visits or watching Ethan work on his art. Then we'll make room, Daniel replied simply. If this matters to you, if we matter to you, Juan, we'll find a way. Isabella stared at him, tears streaming down her face. You have no idea what you're saying. You have no idea what my world is like. Then show me, Daniel said, standing and moving toward her. Let me help you fight for what's yours. Let me be there when you need someone who sees Isabella instead of the CEO. Dad's really good at fixing things, Ethan added helpfully. Maybe he can help fix your company too. Despite everything, Isabella laughed. It's not quite the same as fixing cars, sweetheart. Maybe not, Daniel said, reaching out to take her paint-stained hands in his calloused ones. But the principle's the same. You find what's broken, you figure out why it broke, and you work until it runs right again. Isabella looked down at their joined hands. Her soft skin against his weathered palms, her expensive manicure grown out and chipped against his permanently stained fingers. Two worlds touching, finding connection, despite all the reasons they shouldn't fit together. If I do this, she said slowly, if I go back and fight Victoria, everything changes. The media attention alone will be overwhelming. They'll dig into every aspect of my life, including the people I care about. Are you prepared for that? Daniel thought about Ethan, about their quiet life in small-town Pennsylvania, about the possibility of strangers with cameras invading their privacy. Then he thought about the woman who'd helped his son discover his artistic gifts, who'd looked at Sarah's paintings with reverence, who'd found peace in the simple act of watching him work. Are you worth it? He asked quietly. Isabella's breath caught. What? Are you worth having our lives turned upside down? Are you worth fighting for, even if it gets complicated and messy and harder than anything either of us has ever done? Isabella stared at him, this man who'd saved her from a car crash, and then saved her again from a life that was slowly suffocating her soul. I don't know, she whispered. I've never had anyone fight for me before. Well, Daniel said, lifting her hands to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Maybe it's time you found out what that feels like. The flight back to New York was Isabella's first time on her own private jet in 3 months, and the luxury felt strange after weeks of hiking boots and paint-stained clothes. She'd changed into a business suit for the trip, armor for the battle ahead, but Daniel could see how uncomfortable she looked in the tailored perfection. Ethan was pressed against the airplane window, marveling at the world spread out below them. "Is that where you live?" he asked as the Manhattan skyline came into view. "Sometimes," Isabella replied carefully. "I have an apartment there." What she didn't say was that the apartment took up the entire top floor of a building she owned, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park and rooms she sometimes didn't enter for weeks at a time. She didn't mention the staff of housekeepers and personal assistants and security personnel who managed the details of her daily life. She was trying to ease Daniel and Ethan into her world, gradually hoping that the gradual revelation of her wealth would be less shocking than the full truth all at once. But as their car pulled up to the building, a gleaming tower of glass and steel with a doorman who snapped to attention the moment he saw her, Isabella realized there was no gradual way to reveal that you owned half a city block. "Holy cow," Ethan breathed, staring up at the building that disappeared into the clouds above them. The doorman approached their car with professional discretion, but Isabella could see the curiosity in his eyes as he took in Daniel's work clothes and Ethan's wide-eyed wonder. "Good evening, Ms. Drake," he said smoothly. "Welcome home." The elevator ride to the penthouse was conducted in silence, all three of them lost in their own thoughts. Daniel was trying to process the reality of Isabella's wealth, not the abstract concept of billions of dollars, but the concrete evidence of a life so different from his own that they might as well be from different planets. When the elevator doors opened directly into Isabella's apartment, Ethan's gasp was audible. The space was beautiful in the way that only unlimited money could achieve. Soaring ceilings, museum-quality art furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. But it was also sterile, impersonal, as if it had been designed to impress rather than to live in. "This is where you live?" Ethan asked, his voice small in the vast space. "This is where I sleep sometimes," Isabella corrected. "It's never really felt like home." Daniel moved through the apartment, slowly taking in the evidence of Isabella's real life. The kitchen looked barely used. The living room was pristine but cold. There were no family photos, no personal touches, nothing that spoke of the woman who'd sat in his garage and found peace in simple things. "It's beautiful," he said finally, though Isabella could hear the reservation in his voice. "It's a museum," she replied flatly. "A very expensive, very lonely museum." That night they ordered takeout and ate sitting on the floor of Isabella's vast living room, Ethan chattering about the view, while Daniel and Isabella tried to navigate the strange new reality of their relationship. Tomorrow Isabella would have to face her board of directors and somehow convince them she was stable enough to lead a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. But tonight, they were just three people sharing Chinese food and watching the city lights twinkle below them, pretending that love might be enough to bridge the gap between two worlds that had no business touching. "Dad," Ethan said, as they prepared for bed in one of Isabella's many guest rooms. "Do you think Anna's going to be okay?" Daniel tucked his son under covers that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "I think she's going to fight for what matters to her, and I think she's stronger than she knows. Are we going to help her? If she'll let us." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that had been weighing on Daniel's mind all day. "What if her world doesn't have room for people like us?" Daniel kissed his son's forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of childhood innocence and unconditional love. "Then we'll make room, buddy. Somehow we'll make room." Because the alternative, walking away from the woman who'd brought light back into their lives, was unthinkable. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, they would find a way to make this work. Even if it meant stepping into a world where a single apartment cost more than most people made in a lifetime, where love had to compete with boardrooms and hostile takeovers and the crushing weight of other people's expectations. The battle for Isabella Drake's soul was about to begin, and Daniel Hayes was determined to fight for it, even if he had no idea what weapons to use in a war waged with stock options and corporate bylaws instead of wrenches and honest work. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations about just how different their worlds really were. But tonight, they were together, and that was enough to build on. It had to be. The boardroom at Drake Industries occupied the entire 42nd floor of the company's Manhattan headquarters, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of the city that stretched to the horizon in every direction. Isabella had designed it herself years ago, choosing every detail from the imported marble table to the leather chairs that cost more than most people's cars. She'd wanted to create a space that projected power and success, a room where billion-dollar decisions were made with the casual ease of ordering coffee. Now standing outside those imposing doors for the first time in 3 months, Isabella felt like a stranger in her own kingdom. "You don't have to do this alone," Daniel said quietly, his hand finding hers in the marble hallway. He looked profoundly out of place in the borrowed suit Webb had procured for him, but his presence was the only thing keeping Isabella anchored to herself. "Actually, she does," Webb interjected, his voice gentle but firm. "The board needs to see that Isabella is back, that she's in control. Having support staff in the meeting would send the wrong message." Daniel's jaw tightened at the phrase, support staff, but Isabella squeezed his hand before he could respond. "Marcus is right. This is something I have to face myself." "We'll be right here," Ethan said solemnly, from his position in one of the elegant waiting area chairs. He'd insisted on coming, declaring that Isabella needed moral support for her big meeting. "If you need us, just yell really loud and we'll come running." Despite the gravity of the situation, Isabella smiled. "I'll remember that." She squared her shoulders and walked through the doors into the boardroom, where her future would be decided. The 12 members of Drake Industries' board of directors were already seated around the massive table, their faces ranging from concerned to openly hostile. At the head of the table, in what had always been Isabella's chair, sat Victoria Ashford. Victoria was 62 years old and beautiful in the way that unlimited money and ruthless ambition could make a person beautiful. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe chignon, her suit was perfectly tailored, and her smile was as sharp as a blade. She'd been Isabella's father's right hand for over 20 years, the brilliant strategist who'd helped build Drake Industries into the empire it was today. She was also the woman who'd been systematically undermining Isabella's authority for months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Isabella," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false concern. "How wonderful to see you looking so healthy. We've all been terribly worried about you." "I'm sure you have," Isabella replied, moving to the only empty chair at the table. A deliberate power play that forced her to sit at the opposite end from Victoria. "Shall we begin?" For the next 2 hours, Isabella endured what felt like a psychological evaluation disguised as a board meeting. Board members peppered her with questions about her absence, her decision-making capacity, her commitment to the company. Victoria orchestrated the interrogation with surgical precision, her questions designed to highlight every concern, every doubt about Isabella's fitness to lead. The quarterly reports show significant losses in 3 major divisions. Board member Harrison Webb, no relation to Marcus, said with barely concealed disapproval. Losses that might have been prevented if leadership had been more present. The pharmaceutical merger fell through entirely, added Margaret Sinclair, a woman who'd been Isabella's father's friend, but had clearly chosen her loyalties. Our competitors are calling us unreliable. And then there's the media speculation, Victoria said smoothly. The Wall Street Journal has been asking questions about your stability, your capacity to lead. These aren't concerns we can simply ignore. Isabella absorbed each criticism, each veiled insult with the composure she'd learned from years of corporate warfare. But underneath her calm exterior, she could feel something building. Not the panic she'd expected, but anger. Pure, clean anger at the presumption that her worth as a human being could be measured in quarterly reports and stock prices. "You're absolutely right," Isabella said, finally, her voice cutting through the boardroom's tension like a knife. "I have been absent. I've missed meetings, neglected responsibilities, failed to give this company the attention it deserves." Victoria's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Then you acknowledge that perhaps it's time to consider new leadership." "I acknowledge," Isabella interrupted, "that I lost myself. That I became so focused on maintaining the image of what a CEO should be, that I forgot who Isabella Drake actually was, that I was slowly suffocating under the weight of everyone else's expectations." The room fell silent. This wasn't the script they'd expected. Isabella stood moving to the windows that overlooked the city she'd helped build. "3 months ago, I was in a car accident. A complete stranger stopped to help me. A man who had no idea who I was or what I was worth. He risked his own safety and that of his child to save someone he'd never met, and he asked for nothing in return." She turned back to face the board, her composure absolute. "That night, I remembered something I'd forgotten. I remembered what it felt like to be valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. And I realized that I'd been living a life that was killing me by inches." "Isabella," Victoria said carefully, "this is exactly the kind of emotional thinking that concerns us." "Is it emotional to want to remember why we do what we do?" Isabella shot back. "Is it emotional to care about the people whose lives our decisions affect? Because I've spent the last 3 months rediscovering something that I thought this company was built on. The belief that success means more than just profit margins." She moved back to the table, placing her hands flat on its surface as she faced each board member in turn. "My grandfather started this company with a single art gallery and a dream of making beautiful things accessible to everyone. My father expanded it because he believed that business could be a force for good in the world. And I've been so busy trying to live up to their legacy that I forgot the most important lesson they taught me. Which was," Harrison Webb asked, his skepticism evident, "that the moment we stop caring about people as people, the moment we start seeing them as nothing but numbers on a spreadsheet, we've lost everything that matters." Isabella straightened, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the authority of someone who had rediscovered her purpose. "Victoria, you've done excellent work these past 3 months. The quarterly reports are impressive. The cost-cutting measures have improved our profit margins, and I'm sure the shareholders are pleased with the bottom-line improvements." Victoria's smile was cold, with anticipated victory. "I'm glad you approve of the changes." "I don't approve," Isabella said quietly. "I'm horrified by them." The silence that followed was deafening. "You've laid off 300 people from the educational outreach programs," Isabella continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You've cut funding to the Arts Foundation by 60%. You've canceled the scholarship program that has helped over 1,000 disadvantaged students attend college. You've turned Drake Industries into exactly the kind of soulless corporation my family spent 3 generations trying not to become." "Those programs were bleeding money," Victoria replied, her composure cracking slightly. "They provided no tangible return on investment. They provided hope," Isabella shot back. "They provided opportunity, They provided the kind of legacy that can't be measured in dollars and cents, but matters more than anything we could ever put on a balance sheet. She turned to address the full board. You want to know about my fitness to lead? Let me tell you what I learned during my absence. I learned that there are still people in this world who help strangers without expecting anything in return. I learned that true success isn't about how much money you make, but about how many lives you improve. I learned that the moment we lose sight of our humanity, we've lost everything that makes success worthwhile. This is exactly what we were afraid of, Margaret Sinclair said with evident disapproval. You're talking like someone who's lost touch with reality. I'm talking like someone who's found it again, Isabella replied firmly. And if you think that caring about people makes me unfit to lead this company, then maybe this isn't the company my family built after all. The room erupted in heated discussion, board members talking over each other as they debated Isabella's fitness, her vision, her mental state. But Isabella wasn't listening to their arguments anymore. Instead, she was thinking about Daniel and Ethan, waiting in the hall outside, believing in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. She was thinking about the paintings she'd created in her mountain cabin, each one a reminder of what happiness looked like. She was thinking about Sarah's watercolors and Ethan's growing artistic talent, and the way Daniel's hands moved with unconscious precision as he fixed things that were broken. She was thinking about the kind of leader she wanted to be, not the kind who was feared or envied, but the kind who was respected for caring about something more than quarterly profits. Enough! Isabella said, her voice cutting through the chaos. The room fell silent again. I want a vote. Right now. Either you believe I can lead this company back to what it was meant to be, or you give Victoria what she's been working toward for months. Victoria's smile was triumphant. Isabella, surely you don't want to force a vote when the outcome is so clearly— I'm not forcing anything, Isabella replied calmly. I'm offering a choice. The board can choose the leader who will maximize profits in the short term, regardless of the human cost. Or you can choose the leader who will build something that lasts, something that honors the legacy we inherited and the responsibility we have to future generations. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. But understand this. I'm not interested in leading a company that has no soul. If that's what Drake Industries has become, then maybe it's time for new leadership after all. Isabella walked out of the boardroom with her head held high, leaving behind a room full of shocked board members and one very angry Victoria Ashford. She found Daniel and Ethan exactly where she'd left them, Daniel reading a magazine, while Ethan worked on a sketch in his ever-present notebook. How did it go? Daniel asked, standing as soon as he saw her. I told them the truth, Isabella replied simply. All of it. And now we wait to see if the truth is enough. They didn't have to wait long. 20 minutes later, Marcus Webb emerged from the boardroom with an expression Isabella couldn't read. Well? She asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. Webb's serious expression cracked into a smile. 7-5. You win. Isabella felt her knees go weak with relief. 7-5. Harrison Webb abstained. He said he needed more time to evaluate your proposals. But Margaret Sinclair surprised everyone by supporting you. She said your father would have been proud of the woman who walked out of that room today. Isabella sank into one of the waiting room chairs, the adrenaline leaving her system so quickly she felt dizzy. What about Victoria? She's tendered her resignation, effective immediately. Webb's satisfaction was evident. She's also made it clear that she considers this a temporary setback. She'll be back, Isabella. This fight isn't over. Let her come, Isabella replied with quiet confidence. I'm not running away anymore. Ethan had been listening to this conversation with the serious attention he gave to all adult discussions that seemed important. Now he climbed into the chair next to Isabella and took her hand with the same matter-of-fact affection he'd shown since the day they met. Are you the boss again? He asked. I'm the boss again. Good. Because Dad says you can't fix something if you're not willing to get your hands dirty. Isabella laughed, the sound echoing in the marble hallway. Your dad is a very wise man. I know, Ethan replied with the supreme confidence of childhood. He fixes things. That's what he does. The next 6 months were unlike anything Daniel Hayes had ever experienced. Isabella threw herself into rebuilding Drake Industries with the same intensity she'd once brought to avoiding her responsibilities. But this time, instead of hiding behind corporate protocols and boardroom politics, she led with the authenticity she'd rediscovered in that mountain cabin. She restored funding to the educational programs Victoria had cut. She expanded the Arts Foundation, creating new opportunities for struggling artists to showcase their work. She instituted new policies that prioritized employee well-being alongside profitability, earning grudging respect from competitors and enthusiastic support from her workforce. But the real transformation was in Isabella herself. The polished corporate executive was still there when needed, but she no longer wore that persona like armor. She attended board meetings in paint-stained blouses from weekend art sessions. She brought Ethan's drawings to hang in her office. She spoke at industry conferences about the importance of maintaining humanity in corporate leadership. The media, initially skeptical of what they termed Isabella's artistic phase, gradually came to respect her unconventional approach. Stock prices rose steadily as investors realized that a CEO who genuinely cared about her company's mission was infinitely more valuable than one who simply managed quarterly reports. Daniel found himself drawn into Isabella's world in ways he'd never expected. She insisted on his input for major decisions, valuing his perspective as someone outside the corporate bubble. He attended charity galas in rented tuxedos, learned to navigate business dinners where the wine cost more than his monthly salary, and somehow managed to hold his own in conversations with people who owned small countries. You realize you could stop working at the garage, Isabella said one evening, as they sat in her apartment, watching Ethan work on a painting at the easel she'd bought for him. You could do anything you wanted. Daniel looked up from the engine manual he was reading. Even in Isabella's rarefied world, he remained himself. I like working at the garage. I like fixing things with my hands, solving problems that have real solutions. But you could fix bigger things. You could help me fix the company, fix the problems we're trying to solve with the foundation work. I am helping you fix those things, Daniel replied gently. Just because I'm not wearing a suit and sitting in boardrooms doesn't mean I'm not contributing. Isabella smiled, recognizing the wisdom in his words. You're right. I'm sorry. Sometimes I worry that this world isn't enough for you. This world. Isabella gestured around the apartment. Beautiful, expensive, but somehow transformed by the presence of Daniel's work boots by the door and Ethan's art supplies scattered across the dining table. This life. This strange combination of your world and mine. Daniel set down his manual and moved to sit beside her on the couch. Isabella, you've spent so much time worrying about whether you fit into other people's worlds that you forgot the most important thing. Which is, home isn't a place. It's not a house or an apartment or a garage or a boardroom. Home is the people who matter to you, who accept you for who you are, who choose to stay even when things get complicated. He took her hand, noting the way her expensive manicure was chipped from weekend painting sessions. This apartment was never home for you because you were living someone else's life here. But now, Isabella prompted. Now it's home because we're here with you, because you're finally living your own life instead of the one everyone else expected you to live. That night, as Daniel and Ethan prepared to return to Pennsylvania, they'd maintained their house there, though they spent increased amounts of time in New York. Isabella made a decision that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. "What if we made this official?" she said, as they stood in her foyer, prolonging the goodbye as they always did. "Made what official?" Daniel asked. Isabella's courage almost failed her, but she looked at Ethan, this wise, resilient boy who'd become so precious to her, and found the strength to continue. "This. Us. What if we stopped pretending this is temporary and admitted that we want to build a life together?" Daniel went very still. "Isabella, I know it's complicated. I know there are a million reasons why it shouldn't work. But I also know that I've never been happier than I am when we're together. And I hope, you feel the same way." Ethan, who'd been pretending not to listen to the adult conversation, suddenly perked up. "Are you asking Dad to marry you?" Isabella's cheeks flushed crimson. Well, I suppose I am." "It's about time," Ethan declared with satisfaction. "You two have been making googly eyes at each other for months." Daniel laughed, the sound rich with joy and amazement. "Googly eyes. Dad, you get all weird and smiley when Isabella's around. And Isabella gets all weird and smiley when you're around. It's been obvious forever." Isabella looked at Daniel, vulnerability clear in her green eyes. "Well, what do you say to the boy's logic?" Daniel stepped closer, his calloused hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. "I say that I fell in love with Anna Miller in a small-town garage, and I fell even more in love with Isabella Drake when I realized they were the same person. I say that I don't care about the money or the corporate empire or any of the complications that come with loving a billionaire." "And," Isabella whispered, "and I say yes. Yes to building a life together. Yes to figuring out how to blend our worlds. Yes to teaching Ethan that love is worth fighting for, even when it seems impossible." Isabella's tears spilled over as Daniel kissed her, soft and sure and full of promises for their uncertain but hopeful future. "Does this mean we get to live in the fancy apartment sometimes?" Ethan asked practically. "Sometimes," Isabella laughed through her tears. "And sometimes we'll live in the house in Pennsylvania. And sometimes we'll travel to see art in museums around the world. And Dad will still work at the garage, if that's what makes him happy. And you'll still paint every chance I get." Ethan considered this arrangement with the serious attention he gave to all important matters. Finally, he nodded his approval. "Okay, but I get to design the wedding invitations, and I want to walk both of you down the aisle." "Both of us?" Daniel asked. "Well, you don't have fathers to do it, and I'm the one who figured out you belong together. It's only fair." Isabella knelt to Ethan's level, taking his hands in hers. "Ethan Hayes, would you do me the honor of being our best man? Can I wear a tuxedo? The fanciest tuxedo money can buy." "Then yes, but only if we have chocolate cake at the reception. None of that fancy stuff that tastes like cardboard. Chocolate cake it is." The wedding took place 6 months later in the garden behind Daniel and Isabella's Pennsylvania house. They'd bought the property adjacent to Daniel's modest home and created something entirely new, a space that belonged fully to neither of their old worlds, but perfectly to their new one together. The guest list was an eclectic mix of corporate executives and small-town neighbors, board members and garage mechanics, artists and teachers, and everyone whose lives had been touched by Isabella's transformation from remote CEO to engaged human being. Ethan, resplendent in his promised tuxedo, walked his father and stepmother down an aisle lined with Isabella's paintings and Sarah's watercolors, creating a visual narrative of loss and healing and the courage to love again. Jerry Morrison, now officially retired, but still puttering around the garage most days, served as Daniel's best man. Margaret Sinclair, who'd become an unexpected ally and friend, stood as Isabella's matron of honor. The ceremony was conducted by the local pastor, a man who'd known Daniel since childhood and who'd watched him rebuild his life with quiet admiration. "Love," the pastor said, as Daniel and Isabella exchanged vows they'd written themselves, "is not about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone perfectly suited to your particular brand of imperfection. It's about choosing to see the best in each other, even when the worst is on full display." Daniel's vows were simple and direct, like the man himself. "Isabella, you taught me that it's possible to honor the past while embracing the future. You showed me that love doesn't diminish when it's shared. It multiplies. I promise to support your dreams, to stand by your side when the world gets complicated, and to remind you every day that you are valued for who you are, not what you achieve." Isabella's vows were longer, more elaborate, befitting a woman who'd learned to speak her truth. "Daniel, you saved me from a car crash, but more than that, you saved me from a life that was slowly suffocating my soul. You and Ethan welcomed me into your family when I didn't even know how to be myself. You taught me that authenticity is not a luxury, but a necessity, that love is not something to be earned, but something to be shared freely. I promise to choose courage over comfort, truth over convenience, and to build a life with you that honors both who we've been and who we're becoming together." When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from their unlikely congregation could be heard for miles. Ethan whooped loudest of all, throwing his small arms around both his parents with the uninhibited joy that belonged only to children who felt truly, deeply loved. The reception was held in the garden they'd created together. Part Pennsylvania, practical part Manhattan, elegant, entirely their own. Isabella's corporate colleagues mingled awkwardly with Daniel's neighbors at first, but alcohol and Ethan's determined social engineering soon had everyone sharing stories and laughing together. "I have to admit," Marcus Webb said to Daniel as they watched Isabella dance with Jerry Morrison, "I didn't think this would work." "What changed your mind?" Webb gestured toward Isabella, radiant in her simple white dress, her face glowing with happiness as she listened to Jerry's probably inappropriate stories. "Look at her. I've known Isabella Drake since she was 12 years old, and I've never seen her look like that." "Like what?" "Like herself. Like someone who's finally comfortable in her own skin." As the evening wore on, Daniel found himself standing at the edge of the dance floor, watching his new wife teach Ethan how to waltz, while their guests cheered them on. The boy was growing so fast, already showing signs of the teenager he'd become, but tonight, he was simply a 10-year-old having the time of his life at his parents' wedding. "Penny for your thoughts," Isabella said, appearing at his elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "Just thinking about how we got here," Daniel replied, accepting the glass. 2 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be married to a billionaire CEO, I'd have recommended they seek professional help. And if someone had told me I'd find happiness with a small-town mechanic, I'd have had them fired." Isabella laughed. "Funny how life works out. Do you ever regret it? Giving up the uncomplicated version of your life?" Isabella considered the question seriously, as she always did when Daniel asked something important. "My life was never uncomplicated, Daniel. It was just quietly desperate in ways that took me years to recognize. What we have now, yes, it's complicated, but it's real. and real is infinitely better than empty. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their friends and family celebrate around them. Jerry was now attempting to teach the board members a line dance he'd apparently learned in his youth. Margaret Sinclair was deep in conversation with Daniel's neighbor about the best roses for Pennsylvania soil. Ethan had commandeered the microphone and was providing running commentary on the dancing, his observations hilariously inappropriate and completely accurate. "We should probably rescue the DJ from our son," Isabella observed. "Probably, but not just yet." "Why not?" Daniel turned to face his wife fully, this remarkable woman who'd transformed his understanding of what was possible. "Because I want to remember this moment exactly as it is. All of us together, everyone happy, everything perfect." "Everything's not perfect," Isabella pointed out gently. "There are still board members who think I'm too emotional to run a company. There are still outlets waiting for us to fail. Victoria's still out there somewhere, probably planning her comeback. And Ethan's going to be a teenager soon, which means we're about to face a whole new level of complicated. And I still don't know how to cook anything that doesn't come from a 5-star restaurant. And you still leave your tools scattered around the apartment like some kind of mechanical fairy tale." Daniel laughed, pulling her closer. "Okay, so not everything's perfect. But this moment, right now with you in my arms and our son making a spectacle of himself and all our favorite people celebrating with us, this moment is perfect." Isabella looked around at the scene. At the garden they'd created together, at the community they'd built from two very different worlds, at the evidence of what was possible when people chose love over fear. "Yes," she said softly. "This moment is perfect." Ethan's voice carried across the garden as he regaled their guests with his plans for their honeymoon. "They're going to Paris, which is in France, and Dad's never been on a plane that long, so I made him motion sickness pills. His artistic aspirations. I'm going to paint a picture of tonight so we can remember it forever, and his general satisfaction with the day's events. I told them they should get married months ago, but adults never listen. Later, much later, after the last guest had gone home and the caterers had cleared away the evidence of celebration, Daniel and Isabella sat on their back porch swing, with Ethan curled between them, all three of them, exhausted but reluctant to let the day end. "So what happens now?" Ethan asked sleepily. "Now we live happily ever after," Isabella replied, though she knew it wasn't that simple. "Do people really do that, live happily ever after?" Daniel and Isabella exchanged a look over their son's head, both thinking of the challenges that lay ahead, the compromises they'd have to make, the work it would take to maintain their hard-won happiness. "Not exactly," Daniel said honestly. "Life keeps happening, which means there will be sad days and difficult times and moments when we have to choose between easy and right. But," Isabella added, "if we're very lucky and work very hard at it, we can live mostly happily with enough love to carry us through the times when happiness feels impossible." Ethan considered this with the seriousness he brought to all important concepts. "That sounds better than a fairy tale," he said finally. "Fairy tales end, but real love just keeps going." As if summoned by their conversation, a gentle breeze stirred the garden, carrying with it the scent of Isabella's carefully tended roses and the faint sound of music from a neighbor's late celebration. In the distance, the lights of town twinkled like earthbound stars, and overhead the real stars shone with the patient light of things that endured. Daniel thought about Sarah, about the love they'd shared, and lost about the way grief had shaped him into someone capable of recognizing the precious nature of second chances. He thought about Isabella's journey from the broken woman in the car crash to the confident CEO who'd learned to lead with her heart as well as her head. He thought about Ethan, wise beyond his years, but still young enough to believe in the power of love to transform ordinary moments into magic. "I love you both," Isabella whispered into the night air, her voice carrying all the wonder of someone who'd learned not to take such moments for granted. "We love you too," Daniel replied, his arm tightening around his family. "All of us together." "Forever and always," Ethan mumbled, already half asleep. "Forever and always," they echoed, and in that moment, surrounded by the garden they'd built, and the life they'd chosen, and the love they'd fought for, it felt like the truest promise they'd ever made. The wooden pencil that had started it all was long gone, swept away by time and circumstance. But the connection it had represented, the simple truth that kindness matters, that people are worth saving, that love can bridge any gap if we're brave enough to let it, lived on in every choice they made, every challenge they faced together, every ordinary moment they transformed into something extraordinary simply by sharing it. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. As the night settled around them like a gentle embrace, the Hayes family, mechanic, billionaire, and wise child who'd brought them together, sat in perfect contentment, knowing that whatever tomorrow might bring, they would face it together. And that made all the difference in the world. Some stories end with declarations of eternal love. Others conclude with grand gestures or dramatic revelations. But the best stories, the ones that matter most, end the way this one does, with quiet moments of perfect happiness, with the daily choice to love and be loved, with the recognition that home is not a place but a feeling, and that feeling is worth whatever it costs to protect and nurture and share. The fairy tale was over. Real life, infinitely more precious and complex and beautiful, had begun.